Welcome in to the Rock Talk Studio, where I find you that next great rock and roll book or doc to check out. This is the podcast that reviews, previews, and most importantly, recommends to you the good stuff. I'm your host, Big Rick. Let's plug in and see what I got for you this week. When you think of alternative music, Nirvana obviously comes to the forefront of the conversation. But hold on a second. This week's recommendation, the book Alternative for the Masses, the 90's alt-rock revolution, is the furthest thing from a Nirvana everywhere book. This book goes back and it takes a look at how bands like Fugazi, bands you've probably never heard of, bands I never heard before, how those bands just changed people's minds and made them realize there was a real movement happening. In this book, Alternative for the Masses, it's written by veteran music journalist Greg Prato, and he puts together an oral history here that takes a look at that chaotic creative shift that completely rewired what rock could sound like and feel like. But here's how this is different, how this book's a little bit different. He doesn't do it with a straight line. It's not a linear march through the alternative timeline. Instead, with this one, he approaches a story from a myriad of angles, and that's really what makes this book such a standout. It's built in a truly alternative way, which mirrors the very subject matter that it explores. And to give you an idea of what I'm talking about here, here's a few of the names that contribute to this oral history. Frank Black of the Pixies, Corey Glover, Living Colour, Alan Jurgensen of Ministry, Ian McFay, Fugazi, Les Claypool's in here from Primus, Angela Moore of Fishbone contributes some really cool stuff. Kennedy also is in this book. She was the host of MTV's Alternative Nation. Remember that show on MTV? She shares some really great, funny stories in here. Matt Pinfield from that other really great MTV show, 120 Minutes, which I think was probably my favorite show on MTV because I just learned so much from it. I mean, I was extremely young when MTV was out. You're getting all those big name bands, but that show, that 120 Minutes, was really the one that opened up people's minds and brought them a lot of these artists and really exposed the alt-rock movement. A couple more. Butch Vig, producer of Nirvana, Nevermind's in here. Tanya Donley from the Breeders and Belly. Mike Watt contributes. Bob Mould. Really love the diverse crowd that they pulled together for this. It really adds so much to this book. Another thing that makes this book different than most, and that is the chapters, the way it's presented. This book is full of these great little sub-chapters. There's a chapter on Dave Marquet's documentary, The 1991, The Year Punk Broke. I don't know if you've ever seen that. I remember seeing it years ago. That is a classic. There's a chapter just totally dedicated to that. One of my favorite sections, chapter 5, explores how so many artists of that era had completely different takes on what alternative meant. And it breaks down, it takes a look at how these bands crafted these unique sonic identities and just as importantly, what they didn't want to become. That was an interesting angle. It's full of fascinating reflections. Al Jorgensen's got one of my favorites. Jorgensen's of Ministry kind of sums up the era perfectly. He says, it's funny that back in the day, there was very little technology and everybody sounded different. Nowadays, there's all this technology and oddly enough, everybody sounds the same. Great quote. Here's a couple of other cool chapters that stood out to me. Major labels and indie labels, MTV's 120 Minutes and Alternative Nation, kind of talked about that earlier. They do a really cool chapter on that. The producers, Cobain's death, talking about Kurt's death and how that just completely disrupted the landscape. Subgenres, that is a cool one, kind of goes into the subgenres and not just subgenres in rock alternative. This is where this book kind of takes a step. It talks about rap and dance music. I mean, this book at times does go all over the place. Sometimes it loses its way a little bit, but it casts such a wide net. And for me in this book and for this subject, the alternative music subject, it really, really worked. 28 chapters, 347 pages here. I wanted to mention a little bit more about the producers chapter because this book includes excerpts from one of the last interviews done with Steve Albini, the famous producer who passed away way too young. And he was just easily alternative music's most influential producer and record engineer. He worked on records with Nirvana, PJ Harvey, the Pixies, Jesus Lizard, the Breeders. That was a really cool addition to the book, that extra look from Steve Albini. A lot of books that I talk about explore deep subject matter, but the way alternative music is explored in this book, this is easily one of the deepest books I've read in the 3 years that I've been reviewing rock and roll books and documentaries on the Rock Talk Studio. If you're just talking about really diving into a specific subject matter, this one is really way out front when it comes to the way it's presented. The writer, Greg Prato, weaved together 60 interviews that were conducted exclusively for this book. And he captured a time when underground music briefly took over the mainstream. Prato gives space to an entire ecosystem that made the movement matter. Alternative for the Masses, the 90s alt-rock revolution, the oral history, is written by Greg Prato, and it runs 374 pages. Now, this book has a connection to another book that I recommended and reviewed earlier in the year. What is that connection? Let's go ahead and take a look at that coming up next. A little more conversation about alternative rock is coming up next, but I do want to pause for a second because I've got to tell you about the new book giveaway that's going on right now. You can get a chance to win this really cool Oasis coffee table style book. It's called Trying to Find My Way Out of Nowhere, and it features photographs from the famous photographer Jill Furmanovsky. She spent over 30 years taking pictures of Oasis, and I thought that was a very interesting side angle to this book, that Oasis actually allowed someone to take their picture for 30 years. And Noel Gallagher comments throughout on the pictures. He also writes the foreword, and he talks about his relationship with Jill, which is really interesting. The pictures are tremendous, fantastic, and they really pop with the coffee table style production. You can win this book by subscribing to my newsletter. The newsletter is free, so you don't have to pay for anything. Just subscribe to it. It comes out one time a month, and it covers the world of rock and roll books and docs. It's kind of a reference. It takes this podcast and what I do to the next level. So if you're looking for when's the new Cameron Crowe book coming out, when's that new Ozzy documentary coming out, if you're looking for, hey, I just want the top 5 books and docs of the year, what do you recommend, Big Rig? You got it in there. Go to the show notes. There's a little space where you just click, hit subscribe. You get entered into all the giveaways. And this month is this new cool Oasis book. All right, let's jump back into the conversation about alternative music, because I do want to turn you on to this book. This book came out this year, and it has a chapter in Alternative for the Masses that talks about this, because it has to. You have to talk about alternative music, and you have to talk about Lollapalooza. Right? This other book that I'm talking about, Lollapalooza, the uncensored story of rock's wildest festival by Richard Beinstock and Tom Beaujour, takes that Lollapalooza conversation and really expands on it. That book is also an oral history. They've got 200 interviews in there from a multitude of people who put this thing together. But what's kind of cool about this book is we're talking road managers participated, agents, promoters, sound guys, tour directors, drivers of the bus, critics. It combines a ton of people with a ton of artists who played the Lollapalooza shows, especially those early shows. And these guys are not holding back. This is kind of a tell-all book of what was going on during this Lollapalooza tour. And remember, Lollapalooza was a forerunner. You know, it was Perry's dream. It was his vision. It was a cultural mismatch, and it grew into something that no one thought it was going to be. Perry couldn't even imagine what this thing was going to be. And this book gives you an inside look. I don't think you can get any closer to Lollapalooza's story than this one. Kind of see the spark that lit this thing up, and then how it grew and led to changes not only in the music industry, which was huge, but also as a cultural force. It's an iconic moment in rock and roll history, and it's documented really well in this book, Lollapalooza, the uncensored story of rock's wildest festival. And I do want to mention one more thing about this book. I talked about it when I was talking about the newsletter. I do a running top 5 over the year, and this book sits as my 3rd highest recommended book for the year. So it's a really good book. If you want to take the conversation even further and learn a little bit more about Lollapalooza, this is a great book. All right, next week, it's another book. It's a book that was just finished a few months ago by a rock and roll legend, right before one of the greatest exits in rock and roll history. for tuning in, everybody. Love talking with you. Love talking rock and roll. Love talking about alternative rock, Lollapalooza, all that good stuff, and recommending to you a couple of cool books. Don't forget, you can win that Oasis book. Just sign up for the newsletter. It's free right now. Go to the show notes, subscribe, get in on that giveaway. All right, let's tear it down for this week. Pack it up and head on down the road. I'll catch you next time in the Rock Talk studio.